the concussions is obviously something that they're paying a lot more attention to. I mean, we've got the unfortunate stories of AFL players having to end their careers early because of multiple concussions. And we had an interesting week talking a lot to other allied health who work in the concussion field, and there's this thing called post-concussion syndrome where someone gets a concussion and then doesn't actually, after a couple of weeks recovery, they've still got ongoing lingering symptoms. And when you look at people who have post-concussion syndrome, more often than not, vision is involved. And it's one of those things that may not be necessarily easily picked up through just clarity of sight. It's not like a sight problem. It's not like they've lost their ability to see 20/20. Quite often it's a binocular vision, so how the two eyes are working together, or it's going to be an eye movement problem on how they actually are able to move their eyes. And that's one of the reasons that you need to take concussion seriously, because during that recovery period, and then also as a post-concussion sufferer, your reaction times visually are slower, and therefore you're more likely to suffer a second concussion. And that's when you start to get into sort of more trouble, is when you get that kind of successive concussions. So there's the prevention, being aware of it. I'm mindful my son's starting to play the international game of football. I'm not allowed to call it soccer, but let's call it soccer for the sake of clarity. And, I'm quite concerned about him, how much he heads the ball and things like that. Yeah. So we have chats about that. But what's nice to see is that even at his level, at sort of primary school level, that the coaches are becoming a lot more around concussions and resting and making sure that you recover from it and you don't put yourself in a situation of stacking concussions on top of each other. So prevention is a big one. But it's once you've suffered concussion, if after a few weeks that you are still getting symptoms, then that's something that we can deal with and need to deal with, because that's not something that may get better by itself.
Yeah, and it's something that affects people at all ages, I guess, isn't it? Like, seniors have falls, and it's something that they may want to be aware of as well. But I know, kids, like, I think as you get older, you're sort of like a bit more protective of your body, but compared to when you're a youngster, I see kids on their skateboards or e-scooters doing crazy stuff, and I think that's got to be a lot of the concussion cases that you see in your clinic there.
And worse. I mean, we've seen some fairly hefty brain injuries from people having skateboard accidents, not wearing helmets, those sorts of things. So sometimes they can be quite innocuous. So head protection is certainly an important thing to reduce your likelihood. And I think that's the tricky part with concussion, is it may not always show up on an MRI. That's where it's taken some time for things like whiplash and concussion to get some acceptance that you can't necessarily image the damage, and that you do have to base a lot of it on history and symptoms. Fortunately, we're able to understand the kind of problems we'd be looking for in a concussion, and that can become a normal part. Like, we can use some of our regular binocular vision kind of routines and examinations. There's an instrument over my shoulder here that we use where we can get a finer measurement of how the two eyes are working together, to sort of measure with goggles what the eyes are actually doing as they move, to get a better sense of deeper down what's sort of actually happening. But we do see some interesting cases where it could be the simplest thing created concussion. Someone pumping up the tire on their push bike when they weren't looking, the push bike fell, hit them on the head, just happened to hit them in the wrong place at the wrong time at the wrong speed, and they ended up with a concussion that took them a number of years to recover from. And so it doesn't need to be a massive, big accident for it to be a concussion. It can be a simple, two kids running together on the sports field, and one of them gets concussed and the other one doesn't.